People of Appalachia, what's your creepiest story? 1. I have always been an avid mountain person. When people say they go to the beach for vacation, I respect it, but I prefer the mountains 100%. Something about these old giants has always fascinated me, as if I just cannot avoid but to be drawn towards them and be in awe when hiking on them. Over my short life, 21-year-old student, I consider that I have seen a fair amount of mountain ranges in Europe, from the Alps in Switzerland to the Pyrenees in Spain, and from the Italian Dolomites to the Czech Stolowe Mountains. I have always hiked and camped outdoors a lot, with family and friends, but also by myself. Now, I went to the United States for college, and I have always been tempted to do a part of the Appalachian Trail. From the pictures I saw on the internet, I always wanted to see them in person, and not gonna lie, I must say that the great amount of scary stories of these mountains always attracted me a little bit as well. I am definitely not a person who likes scary movies or anything, but I enjoy reading fellow mountaineer experiences, and to be honest, I mostly just read stories about the AT to know how to prep myself for when I was gonna do it. The scary stories just got my attention every now and a while. That being said, I decided to go to this year and do a small part of the ATs. I went to do a small part between the borders of Tennessee and North Carolina, with Clingman's Dome being the icing on the cake. I was a little bit hesitant to go by myself, since I am not very familiar with both the geography as well as the wildlife in this part of the states. I wanted to go with a friend or my girlfriend who is from North Carolina herself, but both my friend from Germany. As my girlfriend declined because they had to work, I had spring break. So I decided I just had to go by myself since I am graduating this year and will return back to Europe. I started at this place called Bryson City and walked along the Tuckasegee River until I reached the Nolan Creek trailhead. From there on, I just followed the trail until I would reach Clingman's Dome, and from Clingman's Dome I would follow the AT for about a week. I had prepared well for this trip. I carried bear spray and pepper spray. I read some freaky stories about people in the AT, and I also brought this hunting knife and axe for wood. I had some canned food and lots of water, plus water filter, and for the rest, just my tent and sleeping bag. So when I started walking away from Bryson City, and I saw the beautiful aura this mountain range had, I couldn't be happier. I had been wanting to do this since I had arrived here in the US, and I was finally doing it. I encountered some people on the Nolan Creek trailhead who were friendly, but I had made up my mind that I would be better off alone than with strangers. I reached Clingman's Dome the same day, and went a little further before I would set camp. It was beautiful. At night I slept a bit off the trail, with a small campfire while I had dinner, in which I put out before I went to sleep. The first night went super well, as I also was exhausted from the hike to Clingman's Dome. The next 2 days were just as beautiful, and I saw lots of breathtaking views. The people on the AT I encountered were super polite as well. Then, at the third night, I feel like everything took a strange turn. I had set up my camp just as usual, around 160 feet from the trail. No one was camping close to me, or at least not that I was aware of. While getting dinner, I just had this super weird gut feeling that I was not alone there. I felt like as if someone was looking at me from behind a tree or something like that. I tried to just convince myself that I was having an amazing time, that I was safe, and that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I went to sleep and put out the fire as usual. Then, before it was daylight again, I woke up. I woke up with this same gut feeling that even though I was in my tent, someone was watching my tent from a distance. I did not hear a single bird, which was weird because right before daylight is when they start chirping again. I only heard the wind and the leaves. It made me feel uncomfortable, a bit scared even. I didn't fall asleep again, and first thing in the morning, after having breakfast in my tent, I broke up camp and decided to continue my hike. During my hike, I encountered a few people, and again they were very nice, but I stick to myself. While walking on this part of the trail by myself alone, I felt being observed again. I even had the feeling as if something or someone was following me. So every now and then, I would stop dead in my tracks in order to hear if it was real. Now, obviously my mind could be playing tricks, but I would swear that I heard the steps stop a second after I had stopped. So according to me at that moment, someone was following me. I looked around me the whole time, and I never saw someone or something, which made it even more weird. After the long day of hiking, I made camp, this time closer to the trail than usual, because for some reason I thought it would be more safe. I again had this gut feeling of being watched while having dinner outside my tent. So I decided to finish it up in my tent, and I went to the bathroom in a bottle, because I did not want to go outside now. I tried to sleep by closing my eyes, but my mind just focused on hearing the whole time. And that is when I heard it for the first time. A knock, as if a branch was hitting a tree, or a small rock was getting thrown at a tree. Silence followed, for what seemed an eternity, but probably only 10 minutes. Then again, this time more clear. I was scared now and had no idea where to go, since it was dark already. I put on my flashlight in the tent and made myself as big as I could so that my shadow outside the tent would look bigger because of the light. I don't know why this was my reasoning at the time, I just thought of bears. And I held my hunting knife in my hand. The silence had followed the second knock. But now I shouted to pierce the silence in the dark. First I shouted that whoever was joking around, I was armed, and I was not wanting to be pranked. I thought this would scare them off. It didn't. It was almost as if this person found it even more funny knowing I was pissed at them. I heard another knock, and immediately after a knock on what I assumed to be the opposite side from my tent. So now I was guessing it was 2 people instead of 1, and that they liked to pull a prank on an innocent passerby. I tried to stay up as long as I could, but around 4 a.m. my eyes just gave up and I dwelled off. I woke up around 8 a.m. again, with the light of the sun being my savior. I first tried to hear if whoever was pranking me was still knocking. I did not hear anything. I shouted again, stating that I was now going to exit my tent with my knife in my hand, and that whoever had been joking around should make themselves known. I walked out of my tent, and I did not see anyone. I looked for tracks around my camp but could not immediately make something out of it. I decided to get the hell out of there. The next part of my week basically continued being the same. At night I'd hear some knocks from different directions and occasionally I heard what I would guess was a little bit of humming, like as if a person was just humming a tune. Now I never saw anyone except from the occasional hikers on the AT, so I cannot say I saw something weird. But I never shook of this weird gut feeling of being observed and followed during the rest of my hike on the AT. I am now back and commented this to my girlfriend. She says it was probably my mind playing tricks on me, and I am willing to believe her, because I never saw anything. But I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I am in that tent in the middle of nowhere, and someone is watching me and knocking on a tree. And every time I wake up like this, the thought alone scares me, too. Okay, so first off, these stories are 100% true. Most were told by family and friends through the years, along with some of my own encounters in the rural mountains and ridgelines of my county, of course. As with all creepy stories, to give you a good scare, take them with a grain of salt, however. I must still say that these stories are as real as me sitting here writing this up. I hope you all find these as interesting as I do. Background. I have grown up in eastern Kentucky for several years since the age 1. My family, both sides, have grown up in the rural Appalachias, their whole lives as well, but as with modern times moved to the small town nestled here in a valley, situated in between rolling hills and deep ridgelines. Where the following stories take place is a rural area nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It's got a name and it's considered a county. However, the area where my dad's family grew up in within this area, and where these stories come from, is more like a collection of deep ridges and mountain folks than anything else, just to clear up any confusion that this isn't an actual town. During the early days of the settlers, these mountains were home to the Cherokee Indians. Many cemeteries in this area has actually around 30 to 40 graves of Native Americans buried there, marked with stones and rocks rather than a more traditional Indian burial routine in the 1800s. George Washington's aide-de-camp colonel. Story number 1. In the 1970s or 80s, my mom and her aunt, along with her small cousins, were driving in an empty road just outside of town when they created the top of a hill where an abandoned farmhouse stood. They stopped their car in its tracks when they saw a massive hovering saucer-shaped craft hovering over the house. Frightened, my mother and her aunt booked it out of there at a high rate of speed. Scared, they continued down the mountain back to town quickly, however. When they looked in the rearview mirror, they saw the craft coming after them at a high rate of speed, tailing the car and keeping up with it. They attempted multiple times to evade the craft, but to no avail. It chased them for over a mile, back to town, until finally just at the edge of the county road that leads back into town, it finally disappeared. My mother has told this story at least 100 times to family and friends, most of which believe her, as they too have seen strange lights in the sky in and around various areas of the community, though some don't. She drew me a picture of the spacecraft a few years ago, which I still have. It's gray and almost metallic looking by the way she drew it. It has red lights on all edges of the bottom of the craft, along with a few green lights on the sides of it. If anyone wants to see the sketch, I will happily oblige. Story number 2. When my mother was a child, old enough to know when something is going on, was at home with her parents and siblings one night. A man whom her mother and family already knew and were acquainted with barged into the house scared out of his wits. He lived in a cabin deep within the woods some miles away. During his stay there, he reported poltergeist activity, orbs, and paranormal activity within the property and house itself. He would go on to tell my grandmother that reportedly he was tormented all night by a demon who, threw pots and pans, glasses, and even furniture at him. This went on for almost the entire night. It would throw them completely out of the cabinets, almost hitting him with it. It also reportedly started knocking and tapping on the sides of the house and thumping the walls and ceiling. Finally, he mustered up the nerves to utter the Lord's Prayer and attempt to rebuke it in the name of Jesus Christ. This seemed to piss it off even more, and causing it to become even more aggressive, and now would try to kill him with more heavier objects. He ran from the house and spent around 7 to 8 hours walking through the woods and rural country roads back to my grandmother's house. While on his way to the house, he reported that he could hear footsteps trailing him in the woods and next to the road, but he couldn't see anything. It continued this for several hours, until he finally reached the Reese house. Story number 3. In the 90s in town sat a white brick house at the top of a small hill. A man and his wife lived for several years. The man was in his 40s or 50s and the woman somewhere around the same age, I believe. Anyways, one day while my mother was working at a local gas station where the woman also coincidentally worked at, the man had called her saying that something was wrong with the gas in the basement. He went downstairs and laid on his back and crawled up under the thing to see what had happened. He lit a match and immediately the house exploded, sending rubble everywhere and a massive fire hall and smoke that could be seen throughout town. The man's wife, who saw the explosion from the gas station, ran home to discover the house. The man's body, as one might expect in a situation like this, was blown into pieces with body parts even littering some neighboring houses. Since then it has become a local legend that the man's spirit haunts the house that was built on the land where the original one stood. The show Ghost Hunters, or maybe another ghost hunting TV series, actually filmed an episode here because of the experiences by the home's inhabitants. Everything from pots and pans rattling and stuff being thrown around to actual manifestations inside the residence. 3. So this happened last year in Virginia, and is also the reason I never backpack alone anymore. I was taking summer courses at the time, and we ended up with a 3-day weekend in June, so I thought it was a great time to go explore some of the Virginian wilderness. I did a Google search, found a state park with a trail that looked nice, and let my roommate and family know the trail I was going to be on. When I got close to the park area, I saw a little outdoor shop where people hiking the Appalachian trail stop. I went in to grab a map of the area just in case I got lost. As I was talking to the owner, he mentioned a trail that's not well known that has a pretty cool waterfall and swimming hole. This piqued my interest, so I had him show me on the map. It took me outside the state park, but he said it was a great place to go. I paid for the map and thanked the owner. I texted my roommate and parents about the new trail, and I parked my car and set off on my adventure. I should note that the waterfall was going to be a side trip from my journey. I was planning 3 days, 2 nights. I started on part of the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty packed with people, and some of them were really fun to talk to. As expected, as I got further and further from the main trails, I saw less and less people. Around early afternoon, 3 miles from my destination, I noticed it was unnaturally silent. No birds, no bugs, not even wind, and I had a feeling of being watched. I shook it off as me over-analyzing the situation. I got to the waterfall, and it wasn't too spectacular, but it was cool to look at. Plus, it had a good size area to swim in, so naturally I stripped down to my skivvies and took it dip. It was pretty refreshing. As I was getting my clothes back on, I started whistling to myself. It was Chill Bill because it was stuck in my head. That's when I heard something whistle the same tune back. I thought it was a bird copying me, so I went back and forth with it, and it'll repeat whatever I whistled. I thought IR was pretty neat. As I was setting up camp, one couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched again, like I'd get goosebumps and my hairs would stand up. As night fell, I built a small fire and lit my jet boil to make dinner. As I did this, I became hyper-aware that again, there was no sound, just deafening silence. Some part of my brain was telling me that I'm not safe and to leave. I ignored it and crawled into my tent with my flashlight and book. I went to sleep without incident. When I woke up the next morning, my site was trashed. My camp stool was nowhere to be found. My bear bag with my food was cut down, and the contents were thrown across the site. My first thought was a crafty animal chewed through the rope and got at the bag, but I looked at the rope, and it was cut with something very sharp. Plus, none of the food was even touched. I also noticed bare footprints all around my campsite. Keep in mind, I'm at least 6 to 8 miles from a road. As I was looking at the mess, I heard a branch snap off in the distance. I turned to look in that direction. I saw nothing, but I heard that whistling again. My whistle from yesterday. But it was different. It sounded more sinister. It made my hair stand on end, and this is when I listened to my instincts to get the hell out. It sounded like it was a little off in the distance, so I packed up my camp as fast as I could. The whistling got closer as I finished stuffing the tent into my bag. I didn't bother with putting anything away properly. The whistling was incessant and sounded like it was coming for all directions. I got fed up with the whistling, stood, and I yelled into the woods, "Shut up, and what the fuck do you want?" It stopped whistling, and it was quiet for a moment. Then it repeated what I said in my voice. It sounded just like me, but distorted, like it came from an old TV. After I heard this, I immediately threw my pack on and ran the direction I came. I heard it moving just behind me, fast switching between the whistle and my voice. It felt like it was toying with me, not coming too close, but not being too far. Eventually, it sounded like it got further and further away from me. Then it stopped suddenly. When it stopped, I stopped and turned around. I wished I didn't, because I heard the most bone-chilling screech ever coming from right next to me. That's when I started running again. I didn't look, I only ran. Less than a half mile, I ran into a couple that was also backpacking. They saw the look of terror in my face and asked if that was me that screamed, and asked if I was okay. I told them about what happened, and they decided to not go down where I just came from. We moved to a more populated trail, and as quickly as we could. As soon as I got back in my car, I drove to one of the park's ranger stations and reported what happened. Since the site was off park grounds, they told me it wasn't in their jurisdiction, but they'll send a ranger to investigate. The ranger station's parking lot run right up to the woods, and when I was getting into my Jeep, I heard the Chill Bill tune coming from woods just in front of me. I never drove so fast in my life. When told my roommate why I was back after only one night, all he said was, "Bro, I'm never going camping with you." 4. This was the most terrifying moment of my life. Always will be. My family and a friend's family were going on a hiking trip to the Appalachian mountains. We had rented cabins at a camping site and had arranged certain paths to follow each day of our trip, 4 days long, that we would walk each day. The first 3 days went great. We saw wildlife, had a good time, and talked a lot. But on the 4th day, we were taking a trail that was more secluded and overgrown than the others. We were walking for about 30 minutes when I was hit with this overwhelming feeling of uneasiness. The feeling just stayed there no matter how hard I tried to beat it back. Then, and everyone else on the hike denies this, I hear singing, in a language that I've never heard before. It's like the singing described in the myth of the sirens, sweet and enchanting, yet the music invoked a feeling of fear, down to my bones. Everyone else seems completely oblivious to it. I tried telling my dad that something was wrong, but he just told me I was probably tired and that we would stop soon. So about 5 minutes later, and the singing just keeps getting louder, and my heart was racing. We had stopped to rest and eat something as well. I wish with all my heart that we hadn't stopped. About 2 minutes into our little rest, the singing is still getting progressively loud, but my nerves have settled slightly. Then, everything falls silent. Everyone in our group, about 12 people, suddenly turns to the trees to our left. A figure, tall and in a black cloak, was barely visible between the trees. It was a woman, much taller than normal people are, with pure white hair flowing out of her hood. Her head is down, but her face is still slightly visible. All I can make out is that her skin is very pale yellow, like old paper. As we watch, she just stalks closer to our group, finally stopping right at the edge of the trees. She looks up, and I swear to God, as long as I live and breathe, I will never forget her face. Her eyes are completely white, with no pupils or irises visible. She had a thin pointed nose, and had a mouth with lips that were stained red. I don't want to know why. She stares at us for a moment, and then smiles. It was horrifying. She had no teeth, and her eyes began to shine. She then begins to talk. She had a horrible, scratchy, high-pitched voice, and said, "Leave this place while you still can. I'll be watching you. Don't try anything." I blink, and she's gone. Everyone is silent. This is my first time telling this story to anyone else who didn't experience this with me. And I never discuss it with anyone who did experience this with me. It feels good to share this experience with someone.